Part 1. The Galactic Concordance had watched humanity for over a century, and in all that time they never quite figured them out. Humans were loud, messy, and full of contradictions. They built beautiful cities and then argued over who got to live in them. They invented machines that could heal broken hearts and others that could shatter planets. They cried at sunsets and laughed during funerals. To the calm, orderly species of the Concordance, beings who had long ago smoothed out their emotions like stones in a quiet river, humans were a storm that refused to pass. For years, Earth had asked for a seat at the High Synod, the governing body of the galaxy. Not to rule, not to conquer, just to speak. They wanted fair trade routes so their colonies on Mars, Titan, and Proxima b could thrive. They wanted a say in laws that affected their people. Each time the Concordance replied with polite delays, endless reviews, and gentle refusals wrapped in layers of protocol. Your species is still maturing, they would say. Patience is wisdom. Humans tried patience. They signed agreements they didn't like. They rerouted their ships through longer, costlier paths, just to avoid upsetting the delicate balance of interstellar diplomacy. They even let the Concordance inspect their schools, their hospitals, their private messages, all in the name of trust. But trust, it seemed, only went one way. Then came the Helios shipyards incident. Helios was humanity's pride, a massive orbital station halfway between Earth and Jupiter. Built with help from 3 alien species, it was where humans learned to weld starship hulls alongside Qatari engineers, where young pilots from a dozen worlds trained together in zero gravity. It was more than a shipyard. It was a symbol. But when a Qatari freighter accidentally clipped a human cargo tug during a routine docking, causing no injuries, only minor damage, the Concordance acted fast. Citing rising tensions and unpredictable human responses, they declared Helios a Concordance-controlled zone. Overnight, human workers were barred from entering. Their tools were locked away. Their blueprints were classified. The joint project became an alien outpost with human names scrubbed from every plaque. The news hit Earth like a silent earthquake. Not with explosions, but with a deep, cold anger that settled in people's bones. Kyle Dawson stood in the Synod chamber on Nova Prime, his boots clicking softly against the polished obsidian floor. He was not a soldier. He wasn't even a politician by trade. Back home he'd been a teacher, history to be exact. But when Earth needed someone who could speak clearly without shouting, they sent him. He wore a simple gray suit, no medals, no fancy robes like the other delegates. Just a man from Ohio with tired eyes and a voice that carried farther than most expected. Around him the chamber hummed with alien presences. Tall, silver-skinned Veln stood motionless like statues. The Mirathi, with their many eyes and soft, clicking speech, shifted in their floating chairs. The Xanthari enforcers lined the walls, their armor gleaming, faces unreadable behind smooth masks. All of them watched Kyle as he stepped up to the central podium. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't gesture wildly. He just looked at the Synod Council and said, "We've played by your rules. We've compromised, adapted, and waited. We've shown up to every meeting, signed every form, and accepted every no with a smile. But if you won't let us manage our own affairs, then fine. I'll manage it." A ripple moved through the room. The phrase meant nothing in most galactic languages. To the Veln, it sounded like a surrender. To the Mirathi, it seemed like a threat wrapped in riddles. But the Xanthari, those who had studied human behavior closely, exchanged glances. They'd heard that tone before. It was the sound of someone who had run out of patience, not because they were angry, but because they were done asking. Kyle turned and walked out. No dramatic exit, no slamming doors. Just the quiet click of his shoes fading down the hall. Within 3 hours, the Concordance issued Directive Omega-7. It was the highest-level emergency order in their history. All human-controlled space stations, ships, and colonies were to be placed under immediate quarantine. No travel in or out. No communications except through Concordance-monitored channels. All human technology was to be scanned for potential instability. In short, humanity was locked down. Not as enemies, but as children who couldn't be trusted with sharp objects. Back on Earth, the news spread fast. People gathered in streets and parks and virtual meeting rooms. There were protests, yes, but also something quieter, something more dangerous to the Concordance than any riot. In Houston, Lena Ruiz sat in her garage, surrounded by old circuit boards and half-finished drones. She'd worked at Helios before the lockdown. Now she stared at a cracked tablet showing the official directive. Her fingers moved slowly over the screen, not in anger but in calculation. She unplugged a power cell from a broken rover and wired it into a satellite dish she'd built from scrap. "If they won't let us talk," she muttered, "we'll find another way." In Nairobi, Derek Boone watched the sunset from his porch. He'd commanded Earth's Deep Space Patrol for 20 years before retiring. His medals were in a box under his bed. Now he picked up an old comm unit and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. "Jenny," he said when a voice answered, "you still got that freighter running?" A pause, then a laugh. "Good. We're gonna need it." In Reykjavik, beneath a blanket of snow and silence, Nora Bell climbed into a maintenance tunnel under an abandoned research station. She carried a backpack full of tools and a data chip containing schematics no one was supposed to have. The relay array down here hadn't been used since the Solar Wars. But Nora knew it could reach farther than any concordant satellite, if she could just get it humming again. None of them declared war. None of them called for violence. They just started working. The concordants assumed the lockdown would bring humanity to its knees. They thought humans needed structure, oversight, guidance. What they didn't understand was that humans had spent centuries building things in the dark, during blackouts, under dictatorships, in the middle of storms. Being told no didn't stop them. It just made them quieter. And quiet humans, as the galaxy would soon learn, were the most dangerous kind. Kyle Dawson returned to Earth 2 days later. He didn't go to a government building or give a speech. He went to a small school in Cleveland and stood in front of a classroom of teenagers. "They think we're done," he told them. "But we're just getting started." Outside, the first unregistered signal pulsed from Houston, weak but clear. Somewhere over the Atlantic, a cargo freighter changed course without filing a flight plan. And deep under the ice of Iceland, a machine older than most governments whirred to life, sending a single, steady ping into the void. The galaxy had locked the door, but humans had never needed a key. Part 2 of the lockdown was meant to silence humanity. Instead, it made them whisper in code. Across Earth and its scattered colonies, people stopped waiting for permission. They started fixing things themselves. Not with armies or speeches, but with wrenches, old laptops, and stubborn hope. In Houston, Lena Ruiz worked through the night. Her garage was now a command center, lit by the glow of 3 mismatched monitors. She had patched together a network using decommissioned weather satellites, old military relays, and even a few hacked traffic drones. None of it was fancy. Most of it shouldn't have worked at all. But Lena didn't care about fancy. She cared about function. By the 3rd week of the lockdown, she managed to send a short message to Luna Colony. "We're still here. Keep your lights on." The reply came 12 hours later, routed through a smuggler's comms array near Mars. "Lights are on. Send coffee." That simple exchange sparked something. Soon Lena wasn't just talking to Luna. She was linking Titan, Ceres, and even the deep-range mining outpost on Eris. She used civilian, frequencies the concordants ignored because they were too slow or too weak. But humans had always been good at making weak things strong, when they had to. Meanwhile, in Nairobi, Derek Boone stood on the tarmac of an old cargo airfield. The sun was just rising, painting the sky in soft oranges and pinks. Around him, a dozen civilian freighters sat idle, ships that once carried grain, medicine, and machine parts across the solar system. Now they were grounded by concordance order, but Derek had spent years flying these routes. He knew every pilot, every mechanic, every customs officer who'd look the other way for a good cause. He walked up to a battered old hauler named the Steady Hand. Its paint was peeling and one engine coughed when it started. But it flew. Jenny Cole, the ship's captain, leaned out of the cockpit window. "You sure about this, Derek?" she asked, her voice rough from too much coffee and not enough sleep. "Not sure," he said, "but I'm doing it anyway." They called it the Green Run. Officially, the ships were transporting drought-resistant seeds to Martian farms, perfectly legal, perfectly boring. But hidden in the cargo holds were encrypted data drives, medical supplies, and spare parts for colony life support systems. The concordants scanned every manifest, but they didn't understand human tricks. A crate labeled potato seeds might also contain a microfusion cell. A shipment of textbooks could hide a portable water purifier. The first run went smoothly. The second less so. A Xanthari patrol ship hovered near the Mars transfer gate, scanning everything. Jenny held her breath as the freighter passed through. But the Concordants only saw what they expected to see: farmers, seeds, and paperwork. They didn't see the quiet rebellion in the cargo hold. In Reykjavik, Nora Bell finally got the old relay array working. It had taken weeks of digging through ice, rewiring corroded circuits, and arguing with a temperamental AI that kept calling her operator unknown. But one cold morning, as snow fell softly outside, the machine hummed to life. A green light blinked steadily on the control panel. Nora wiped frost from her goggles and typed a single command. The array sent out a pulse, not loud, not flashy, just a quiet signal aimed at the edge of human space. It bounced off a derelict satellite, then another, then vanished into the dark. 2 days later, a reply came from Proxima B, a simple confirmation ping. The colonies were listening. Back on Earth, people began to organize without organizing. There were no grand meetings, no secret handshakes, just neighbors helping neighbors. A baker in Buenos Aires shared power with the apartment above him when the grid flickered. A teacher in Manila taught kids how to build radios from scrap. In Vancouver, a retired engineer turned his backyard into a workshop for fixing broken comms gear. The Concordants watched all this with growing confusion. Their sensors showed human activity dropping in official channels, but energy use was rising in unexpected places. Data traffic on civilian bands had tripled. Freight traffic on non-strategic routes was up by 40%. Yet there were no weapons, no warships, no declarations of defiance. It was as if humanity had decided to ignore the lockdown by pretending it didn't exist. On Luna, a young medic named Samir Patel used a stolen medical scanner to diagnose a child's fever through a cracked tablet. The scanner wasn't supposed to work off-station, but Samir had rewired it using parts from a broken coffee maker. On Titan, a group of students built a small greenhouse using recycled plastic and Concordance-approved nutrient paste, then grew tomatoes in it, just to prove they could. The most surprising thing wasn't what they built, but how they shared it. Every fix, every trick, every workaround was uploaded to a hidden network Lena called the Loop. It wasn't secure in the traditional sense. Anyone could stumble onto it if they knew the right frequency. But that was the point. The Loop wasn't hidden. It was just overlooked. Like humans themselves, even the Concordance's own systems began to glitch in strange ways. A Zenthari patrol drone near Ceres suddenly rerouted itself to deliver a package of antibiotics to a sick miner. A Marathi trade terminal in orbit around Venus displayed a human folk song for 3 seconds before resetting. No one claimed responsibility. It was just happening. Derek Boone flew his third green run with a new co-pilot, a quiet woman named Mira who used to design navigation software. She brought a small black box with her. "It's not a weapon," she told Derek, "it's a key." The box could mimic Concordance authorization codes just long enough to slip past checkpoints. It wasn't perfect. It only worked for 90 seconds at a time, but 90 seconds was enough. By the end of the second month, the human colonies were talking again. Not through official channels, but through whispers in the static. Through hidden signals in routine data bursts. Through freighters that just happened to stop by remote outposts. The Concordance issued new warnings. They tightened patrols. They threatened sanctions. But sanctions didn't matter when you were already cut off. Patrols couldn't stop signals that traveled through forgotten satellites. And warnings? Humans had heard plenty of those. What the Concordance failed to understand was this. Humans didn't need permission to help each other. They never had. Locking them out didn't make them helpless. It just made them clever. In Houston, Lena smiled as another message came through the loop. "Got your signal? Sent you blueprints for a better antenna. Tell Nora thanks." She printed the schematics on an old-school printer and taped them to her wall. In Nairobi, Derek watched Jenny's freighter lift off into the dawn sky, its cargo hold full of hope disguised as hay. And in Reykjavik, Nora sat in the quiet hum of the relay station, listening to the soft ping of 1,000 voices saying in their own way, "We're still here." The galaxy had locked the door, but inside humans were already building a new one. Part 3. 6 months into the lockdown, the Concordance began noticing strange things near the edge of the solar system. Their long-range sensors picked up energy spikes in the Kuiper belt, brief, bright flashes that vanished before any ship could be identified. At first they blamed solar flares or malfunctioning probes, but the pattern repeated. Always near old human mining zones. Always just outside scanning range. The Xanthari called them ghosts. The Marathi called them glitches. But the Veln, who trusted patterns more than proof, grew uneasy. What the Concordance didn't know was that the ghosts were real and human. The lead ship was called the Odyssey Dawn. It wasn't built in a shipyard. It was stitched together in secret piece by piece inside a hollowed-out asteroid near Pluto. Its hull came from a retired deep space tug. Its engines were salvaged from 3 different freighters. Its navigation system ran on code written by a teenager in Oslo who'd never left Earth. Nothing about it was official. Nothing about it was supposed to work. But it did. At the helm sat Eli Vance. He'd spent most of his life flying cargo runs between Mars and the Belt. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't even particularly brave. But he knew ships like other people knew their own hands, and when Lena Ruiz asked if he'd pilot something a little unusual, he just nodded and packed a toothbrush. His crew was small. Maya Tran handled communications. She could patch into almost any system using nothing but a handheld device and a stubborn attitude. Jordan Briggs watched the tactical feeds, not because they expected fights, but because you never knew when a Concordance patrol might drift too close. And Priya Desai, the xenolinguist, listened to alien broadcasts, not to spy, but to understand. She believed that if humans wanted to be heard, they first had to learn how to listen. The Odyssey Dawn didn't carry weapons. It carried supplies, medicine, food, spare parts, and data chips full of human knowledge. Its mission wasn't to fight. It was to show up. Their first stop was a Marathi colony near the edge of human space. The Concordance had cut off aid after a minor trade dispute, leaving the colony stranded with failing life support. The Marathi didn't ask for help. They never would. But when the Odyssey Dawn appeared out of nowhere, hovering silently outside their main airlock, they didn't fire. They just stared. Eli sent a message in simple Marathi script. We brought filters. Tow strings. The Marathi hesitated. Then slowly they opened the outer bay. Maya guided a drone carrying the filters inside. No one spoke. No one thanked them. But as the Odyssey Dawn turned to leave, the colony's main lights blinked 3 times, a Marathi sign of respect. Word spread. Not through official channels, but through whispers between freighter pilots. Through coded messages and supply manifests. Through the quiet hum of shared frequencies. Wherever the Concordance's rules caused suffering, the Ghost Fleet appeared. They showed up at a Veln research station when its food synthesizer failed. They dropped off replacement parts wrapped in thermal blankets, then vanished before the Veln could even raise an alarm. They guided a lost Xanthari scout ship through a solar storm using nothing but a human-made star map and calm voice instructions from Priya. The Concordance scrambled to respond. Patrols doubled, sensors were upgraded, but the Ghost Fleet moved like smoke, here one moment, gone the next. They used old mining tunnels as hiding spots. They bounced signals off dead satellites to confuse trackers. They flew routes no one else dared take, through radiation belts and gravitational eddies that would shred a normal ship. What made them truly invisible wasn't their tech. It was their purpose. No one expected a rescue ship to be a threat. No one scanned a vessel carrying medicine for hidden weapons. The Concordance looked for war. Humans offered help. Back on Earth, people followed the fleet's movements through the loop. Kids drew pictures of the Odyssey Dawn. Mechanics in Jakarta built scale models from scrap metal. In Cape Town, a group of engineers started designing a second ghost ship just in case. Eli never saw any of that. He was too busy flying. But sometimes, during quiet shifts, Maya would play voice messages from home. Short, crackling notes from friends, family, even strangers. My sister's fever broke, one said. Thanks for the meds, another. We got your signal. We're not alone anymore. Those messages kept them going. One night, near the icy rings of Neptune, Jordan spotted something unusual. A distress call, faint and broken, coming from a Concordance-controlled transport. It was a Marathi refugee ship, overloaded and leaking oxygen. The Concordance had ordered it quarantined after a minor outbreak of a non-lethal virus. But the ship was running out of time. Eli didn't hesitate. Set course, he said. Maya tried to warn him. If we help them, they'll know it's us. They'll track the ship. Let them, Eli replied. People are dying. The Odyssey Dawn matched speed with the refugee vessel. pre-ascent medical protocols in Marathi. Jordan guided repair drones to seal the leaks. Maya rerouted power from their own life support to keep the refugees breathing just a little longer. It took 6 hours. By the time they finished, the Concordance patrol was only minutes away. "Time to go," Jordan said. But as they pulled away, the refugee ship sent one final message, not in code, not in script, but in plain human English, translated by someone on board. "Thank you." The patrol arrived too late. All they found was an empty patch of space and a single oxygen canister floating nearby, labeled in neat handwriting, "For emergencies." That moment changed everything. The Concordance couldn't ignore it. A human ship had broken the lockdown, not to attack, not to steal, but to save lives the Concordance itself had abandoned. Debate erupted in the Synod. The Velen argued that humanity's actions proved their maturity. The Marathi admitted their own colonies had benefited from ghost deliveries. Even the Zinthari began to question whether the lockdown was helping or hurting galactic stability. But the ghost fleet didn't stop. They couldn't. There were still people out there, human and alien, who needed help. And as long as that was true, Eli and his crew would keep flying. In the cold dark between stars, the Odyssey Dawn turned toward its next destination. No fanfare, no flags. Just a ship, a crew, and a simple promise. If you're in trouble, we'll manage it. And somewhere deep in the heart of the galaxy, the walls around humanity began to crack, not from force, but from kindness. Part 4. The Concordance had always believed unity was its greatest strength. For centuries, its member species followed the same laws, spoke through the same channels, and trusted the same rules. But now that unity was fraying at the edges, and the thread pulling it apart was human kindness. It started with small doubts. A Velen elder questioned why a species that sent medicine to enemies should be treated as a threat. A Marathi Trade Council admitted that human black market networks were delivering goods faster and cheaper than official routes, without corruption or violence. Even the Zinthari, who rarely spoke outside protocol, began filing reports that described humans not as reckless, but as resourceful. "They do not break systems," one report read. "They mend them." The turning point came after the rescue of the Marathi refugee ship. The Concordance could no longer pretend the ghost fleet was a myth or a glitch. It was real, and it was changing minds. On dozens of worlds, citizens began asking why their own governments hadn't acted, while humans risked everything to help. Protests weren't loud or violent. They were quiet gatherings outside Synod embassies, holding signs that read, "Let them help," or "We saw what they did." Back on Earth, Kyle Dawson watched these shifts with quiet hope. He knew words alone wouldn't win freedom, but actions could. He gathered a small group of thinkers, builders, and leaders, not politicians, but teachers, engineers, doctors, and pilots. They met in a basement beneath an old library in Chicago, far from official eyes. Their task was simple: write a new way forward. They called it the Accord of Self-Stewardship. It wasn't a declaration of war. It wasn't even a demand. It was a promise. In clear, plain language, it stated that humanity would manage its own affairs, its ships, its colonies, its choices, but would never use that freedom to harm others. It said humans would share knowledge, aid those in need, and respect the rights of all species. Most importantly, it asked for nothing in return except the right to try. While they wrote, the Ghost Fleet kept flying. Eli Vance and his crew delivered clean water filters to a drought-stricken Qatari outpost. They helped a stranded Velen science team recalibrate their telescope using human math. Each act was small, but together they painted a picture the Concordance couldn't ignore. Humans weren't a danger. They were neighbors. On Luna, a group of students built a solar-powered desalination unit and sent the plans to every colony in the system through the loop. In Nairobi, Derek Boone's green runs now included alien passengers, Marathi medics, Velen botanists, even a young Zinthari observer who wanted to see how humans fix things without orders. No one checked their papers. No one asked for permits. They just helped. The Concordance tried to clamp down harder. They issued new restrictions, threatened fines, even rerouted patrols to block known ghost routes. But it was like trying to hold back the tide with your hands. Every time they closed a door, humans found a window. And more other species began slipping through that window too. A Marathi freighter started carrying human-made air filters under false manifests. A Veln research vessel quietly accepted navigation help from a human drone during a magnetic storm. The Zenthari stopped scanning every human signal so closely, not because they were ordered to, but because they'd seen what those signals carried. Not weapons, but warnings about solar flares, coordinates for safe passage, even lullabies for children on long-haul ships. The real fracture came during a synod session on Nova Prime. The High Council proposed extending the lockdown for another year. But before the vote could be called, the Velm delegate stood, an act so rare it silenced the entire chamber. "We have watched," the Velm said, their voice like wind through stone. "We have seen humans feed the hungry, heal the sick, and guide the lost, all while locked out, ignored, and called unstable. If this is chaos, then perhaps order has failed us." The Marathi delegate followed. "Our markets thrive where human networks reach. Our people live because of their aid. To punish them is to punish ourselves." Even the Zenthari commander, usually silent, gave a single nod of agreement. The vote was never taken. The proposal died in silence. On Earth, Kyle and his team finished the accord. It was only 3 pages long. No fancy words. No hidden clauses. Just honesty. They translated it into every known language, 317 of them, and broadcast it across every open channel they could find. Not through military arrays or government towers, but through the loop. Through old weather satellites, through the comm systems of freighters and farming drones. It spread like a song, not a command. Alien worlds heard it. Some ignored it. Some mocked it. But many listened. A young Veln student wrote back with a question. "What does self-stewardship mean?" Kyle replied personally, "It means we take care of our own so we can help take care of yours." On the Odyssey Dawn, Eli read the accord aloud to his crew. Maya cried quietly. Jordan smiled for the first time in weeks. Priya recorded it in 5 different languages and sent it to every colony they'd ever visited. The concordance didn't respond right away. But something had shifted. Patrols grew less frequent. Scans became less aggressive. And for the first time since the lockdown began, a human ship passed through a concordance checkpoint without being stopped. Not because the rules had changed, but because the guards chose to look away. In Houston, Lena Ruiz received a message from a Marathi engineer. It contained schematics for a better power converter, freely shared, no trade required. In Reykjavik, Nora Bell's relay station picked up a new signal. Not from humans, but from a Velen observatory, sending star maps as a thank you. The galaxy was starting to trust them. Not because humans had won a war, not because they'd shouted the loudest, but because they'd shown up when it mattered again and again, with nothing but open hands and stubborn hearts. And as the accord traveled farther into the stars, carried on waves of static and hope, the walls around humanity didn't just crack, they began to dissolve. Part 5. The end didn't come with a battle or a treaty signed in fire. It came quietly on a cold morning near the edge of known space, when a ship full of strangers chose to trust a human they'd never met. The Marathi colony vessel, Whisper of Tides, was dying. Its main reactor had failed during a routine jump, and its backup systems were failing one by one. Oxygen levels were dropping. The children on board had started coughing. The Concordance had been notified, but their rescue fleet was 3 days away. Too late. The Marathi captain sent no distress call. Pride wouldn't allow it. But someone on board must have whispered into an old comms channel, because the signal reached the loop. Eli Vance heard it while eating a stale protein bar in the Odyssey Dawn's cramped galley. He didn't hesitate. "Set course," he said, crumbs falling onto his flight suit. The Odyssey Dawn arrived just as the Whisper of Tide's lights began to flicker. Maya opened a channel in careful Marathi. "We're here to help. No questions. No cost." For a long moment there was silence. Then the Marathi airlock creaked open. What happened next was recorded by a dozen ship logs shared across species and replayed in synod chambers for weeks. Eli didn't board with weapons or demands. He walked in with a team carrying oxygen canisters, medical kits, and a portable reactor core built from spare parts in Nairobi. Jordan monitored the failing systems while Priya translated emergency procedures. Maya kept the ship's comms stable using a patchwork of human and Marathi code. They worked for 8 hours straight. No breaks, no arguments. Just hands moving, voices calm, minds focused on one thing, keeping others alive. When it was over, The whisper of tides hummed with steady power again. The children slept peacefully. The Marathi captain stood before Eli, eyes glistening in a species that rarely showed emotion. He placed a small carved stone in Eli's palm, a family heirloom given only to those who saved a life without asking for anything in return. The Concordance couldn't ignore this. Not this time. The rescue had been witnessed by 3 neutral freighters, 2 Velen survey drones, and a Zenthari patrol that had arrived too late to stop it, but just in time to see the truth. Within days, the High Synod called an emergency session. This time, humans were invited. Kyle Dawson stood once more in the Great Chamber on Nova Prime, but he wasn't alone. Beside him stood Lena Ruiz, Derek Boone, Nora Bell, and even Eli Vance, still in his flight suit, the Marathi stone tucked in his pocket. They weren't there to beg. They were there to witness. The Zenthari commander rose first. "We have watched," he said, voice low and steady. "We have seen humans act not as children but as guardians. Directive Omega-7 is no longer just. It is wrong." The Velen elder nodded. "To lock away kindness is to starve the soul of the galaxy." The Marathi delegate simply placed a data chip on the central table. It contained logs from the whisper of tides, along with messages from dozens of worlds thanking humans for aid during the lockdown. No vote was needed. The decision was unanimous. Directive Omega-7 was rescinded. All travel bans lifted. All communications restored. Human colonies were recognized as sovereign. And for the first time, Earth was granted a permanent seat on the High Synod, not as a junior member, but as an equal. After the session, the Zenthari commander approached Kyle. He removed his mask, a rare sign of deep respect, and looked him in the eyes. "When your kind says fine, I'll manage it. Perhaps we should listen." Kyle smiled. "We've been managing it all along. You just didn't see us." Back on Earth, people didn't celebrate with fireworks or parades. They went back to work. Lena upgraded the loop into a public network open to all species. Derek started a civilian transport guild that included Marathi pilots and Velen navigators. Nora's relay station became a joint human-alien communications hub. And Eli? He kept flying the Odyssey Dawn, now with official clearance, but still carrying extra medicine just in case. The Accord of Self-Stewardship became more than a document. It became a way of life. Human engineers helped rebuild damaged alien stations. Alien scientists shared clean energy tech with Earth cities. Trade flourished, not because of rules, but because trust had finally taken root. Years later, a young student on Proxima B asked her teacher why the galaxy changed its mind about humans. The teacher, an old man who remembered the lockdown, smiled and said, "Because when everyone else waited for orders, humans just helped, and that was enough." The galaxy had locked the door, thinking humanity needed to be controlled. But humans had never needed control. They needed only the chance to show what they could do when left to their own conscience. Now ships from 100 worlds flew under a new understanding. That strength isn't in power, but in care. That order isn't born from rules, but from respect. And that sometimes the most powerful words in the universe are the quiet ones spoken when someone says, "Fine, I'll manage it," and then does.